So Leo and Jackie, if you don't know, are from California Sunday and Pop-Up Magazine, and the photo editor and creative director. So we are by we I mean me at least, and I think a lot of other people in the room are very excited that they're here. So thank you for being here. So this discussion is about your collaboration. We kind of started the day with collaboration, and we're bringing it home with some collaboration. So I got some softball questions for you. Here's the first one. Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
Vanilla.
Vanilla, okay. Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Neither.
Oh, okay, good. Minimalism or maximalism?
Minimalism.
Minimalism.
Okay. Sweet or salty?
Both.
I like that too.
Oh, okay, all right. I'm not gonna say that they're copying each other, but almond butter or peanut butter?
Almond butter.
Peanut butter.
Oh, okay, good. All right. So now that we got that out of the way.
As you can see, we complement each other well.
Can you tell us how you guys met?
We have a mutual friend that's also in photography. Her name's Carrie Levy, and I used to work with Carrie at Wired, and I think at some point I left Wired, but Jackie went in to work at Wired, and so Carrie was sort of the conduit in terms of like introducing us and all that. And when I was like the very first hire for Cal Sunday and Pop-Up, and when we were looking for a photo director, and so Carrie had strongly recommended her, and so that was sort of our first sort of.
Yeah, but Leo and I had worked in magazines for years in New York, but never met each other because I was working always in fashion magazines, and Leo was at the New York Times Magazine. And even though the magazine world is kind of small in New York, we never met each other until
I was
moving
really
to San
surprised
Francisco.
by that.
So you knew of each other, but hadn't
No,
actually
actually,
met.
I didn't.
No, no idea.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you were there first, but had nothing to do with Jackie coming aboard.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I knew nothing of her, and so
okay,
she
great.
came
So
highly recommended.
you were strangers.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Totally.
But it was that recommendation from a very close friend of ours that
Yeah.
ensured that Leo wasn't hiring a crazy person.
Leo, would you agree with that?
Yes.
Can you tell me what your first day was like on the job for both of you? Because it was obviously not the same day.
Wow. The first day was exciting, but it was very quiet because it was just me and my editor, Doug, and the publisher, Chaz Edwards. And we were in a shared space, a very huge open space, and we just took up like a couple of desks. And there really wasn't much to do at that point because we didn't have any content. It was more like I was exploring and doing research and trying to find typefaces and think about sort of the general direction of the magazine. So it was very free form because there were no impending deadlines. There was like a sort of a target date of when we would have our first issue. But it was pretty quiet. I mean, and you realize, like I'm sure with anyone who works at a startup, you take for granted a lot of things working at established companies. Like I was just looking for a paperclip for a long time. I just could not find a paperclip I just wanted to use.
And then
you
Jackie
realize that
showed up with a box of paper clips, and you were like, "Oh, this is gonna work."
Yeah, and you realize like the little things like that. Like I had to order the printer for our company, and I've never ordered a giant printer before, only like the home versions. And so, figuring things out like that, and ordering pens and paper clips and things like that. You just take those things for granted, and you realize when you join a startup, it's really a startup. You're really starting with nothing. Yeah, that was a learning experience.
Do you like Leo's taste in pens?
Yeah, he's very good at picking out all sorts of things, like
forever.
space heaters. He's a great creative director, but he has great taste in appliances.
And just things in general. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about your first day?
My first day, I had spent my career thus far working for magazines that have been around for over 15, 20 years, like W and Elle magazine, and so my first weeks were emailing photographers that I had always wanted to work with that hadn't, maybe in the fashion realm, and saying, hey, we're starting a magazine in 2014. No, we're not crazy, but this is what it might be about. And would you like to be, would you like to send me your unpublished work, or can we work together once this does come out? So it was sending a lot of emails and obviously talking with Leo and Doug, a very small team, about what we're going to create.
And at that time, when you were thinking about what you were going to create, was there a certain tone or some kind of larger objective that you were going for? Did you know? Because I think sometimes when you start things, you're kind of like, yeah, like generally it's like an ish, and we kind of get it. But then when you're forced to share it with other people, all of a sudden you have to start kind of trying that message. Were you clear on the tone originally?
I was pretty clear with from initial conversations with Doug, our editor-in-chief, and Leo, what the photography would look like and what a magazine made in California and stories about people, what that should look like. And it was a very big departure from my previous life working in fashion, which was all studio and very calculated. And so we didn't want that. And so I spent also the first few months making hundreds of mood boards of saying, okay, if we want to do a profile of a person, this is maybe the look and feel of the portraiture and the landscape photography that I'm interested in. So we would spend a lot of time sharing those kinds of images.
Yeah, I think it was rather serendipitous because when I interviewed Jackie and Doug interviewed Jackie, prior to that interview process, Doug would describe to me like his vision for the magazine, and there was the one key word that he kept on coming back to was wanting the magazine to feel very cinematic. And from a design point of view, from a photographic standpoint, that sort of conjures up a lot of just possibility. Like how do you make a static object more cinematic, more film-like? And that's a fun challenge from a design perspective as well as photography. And it was serendipitous because I remember Doug telling me like Jackie used the exact word cinematic to just sort of describe what she would envision the magazine to be. And so it felt like very just sort of like destined to sort of work out that way. And yeah.
When you talk about that sort of ambition of the magazine feeling cinematic, could you unpack that a little bit or describe what that means to you, or tell us a little bit more about what that is?
I can start with
well,
that.
I'm actually curious from both of your perspective because I think, at least for me, it's actually easier to imagine what cinematic means as an image-based expression. And right. I'm more like, what does that mean from a design expression?
I guess, well, first of all, the challenge of designing a magazine from scratch is incredibly intimidating. It's a landscape that's so saturated. There were so many magazines out at the time, even though a lot of them were folding or suffering at the time financially. There were so many, and so to be able to sort of stand out and for people to take notice, there's a lot of pressure there to be, as a designer, to be like, how do I make something that's interesting and viable and surprising to people when there are so many out there to choose from? And so from a cinematic quality, it sort of influenced everything about the magazine, how you experience the magazine. And so obviously with photography, it's a little bit easier to sort of match up cinematic quality to imagery. And so I took the form, the page turning experience is sort of like the camera that sort of is the moving sort of object that sort of takes you through the film, right? And so the page turning experience itself is like a way of cutting from one scene to the next, right? And you play with that, whether it's through scale and contrast or through intimacy, through a change in emotion or what have you. So all of those things sort of influence how the design is made. And so you'll see a lot of just sort of moments in the magazine where when you are introduced to a story and then you'll turn the page and it'll continue sort of telling you what this story is about. And traditionally magazines are regularly just like one spread. They'll tell you a headline, they'll tell you 2 or 3 sentences of what the story is about. It's a pretty standard way of doing it, and so we wanted to sort of to play out the cinematic quality, just sort of like, what if we played out the photography a little bit more? It adds to sort of the filmic quality, but also the page turning experience of just turning the page and surprising the reader with something. It's that sense of anticipation of like, oh yeah, I know this thing, and then what happens? And when you sort of piggyback the design off of like what is surprising about a story, and when those things work together, then you're sort of really taking advantage of what's possible. So yeah, everything from the introduction of a story to the covers as well. Traditionally, covers are just very direct. It's very impactful and direct. It's like, tell the reader exactly what you want to tell them about a story. And for us, it's really, it was Doug's idea to actually go with no cover lines on the cover, and which is a surprise to us.
It's a dream come true.
It's a dream come true. Like, what editor-in-chief, head of a magazine says, how about like no cover lines?
I mean, he's a writer, so
Yeah.
it's very surprising.
I think at one point we even considered like, how about no logo, just like just an image, And I'm like, whoa, that's a little bit too much.
Now you've
even
crossed
for
a
me,
line.
being the purist that I am. And I was like excited about that possibility of just having no cover lines on the cover. But at the same time, as a designer, it's very, for someone who likes to make sure that things are clear and they communicate clearly, when you just have an image, it's kind of like very sort of ambiguous, because text like tells you exactly what something is, what something's about. And so when you don't have that, it makes it hard, and so you don't want to be completely opaque either. You can have a beautiful image, but if it doesn't mean something, then you're not sort of helping anyone in terms of getting into the story, and so when you miss that sort of element, it's hard from a design standpoint. So it's made some of the covers kind of hard. It's not easy. You would think that making a magazine without any cover lines would be pretty easy. It's actually kind of very difficult. But the reason why I bring up the covers is because we have a 2-beat cover. So when you turn the cover over, you have a spread, and we usually use that space, which is typically reserved for advertisements, to further the cover, the explanation of the cover. So where we're somewhat ambiguous but intriguing on the cover, we provide just clarity from that turn over. To tell exactly the reader with text and with further imagery what the actual story is about. So it's really just sort of, when we started the magazine, it was like we want to sort of rethink what a magazine could be, but also make it somewhat familiar too. You don't want to be like, turning every story on its side 90 degrees and just sort of, that's annoying to people, We've
done that once, no?
Yeah, but it was
only lightly annoying.
But yeah, like just sort of like not doing things just for the sake of doing them, but because they furthered sort of our purpose of like sort of making it cinematic.
Yeah. Jackie, for you, you said you did hundreds of mood boards. How did you know you had achieved cinematicness and the kind of right flavor of that for what you were trying to achieve as a team?
Yeah, I think when we started getting stories in and seeing that our stories are incredibly cinematic in the way that they unfold and the characters and the scenes, I knew that once the text came in, that the images that I had started pulling that really had this intimate look into people's lives, they were matching up quite well. And so then I knew that I was on the right track. I mean, it's still a guessing game. Paloma, our photo editor, who's in the audience here, every issue we're trying to do something that's surprising that we haven't done before. So hopefully when you're looking through the magazine, as you're flipping through, there's styles of photography that, sure, this magazine feels like it's a cinematic photojournalism, but also, you might flip to something that is totally out there and completely different. Because that's what I want to look at when I'm looking through magazines, because a lot of magazines that are made elsewhere, it's the same kind of 3 photographers in each issue. And that's not what we're doing at California Sunday. I always try to have emerging photographers and established photographers in every single issue, just to give a lot of people chances to be in the magazine. And also on Pop-Up, we hire emerging photographers too.
Yeah. Has your job changed a lot? I guess this is kind of a leading question, but with the rise of digital photography, it's almost as if a story could have an infinite amount of images that come with it. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, we have some photographers. The process for creating each story is we'll get a draft in, and Leo, Paloma, Supriya, Annie, and I will meet about the best approach for the story after reading it. And if it is photography, then Paloma and I will research who should shoot the story. If it's a story that takes place in Colombia, we'll do a deep dive of the local photography scene there, because I think it's, when you have a photographer that's from the place where the story takes place, it becomes a bit more intimate and authentic. And so based on that, we'll then send the draft to the photographer. And that photographer will go out and shoot, hopefully over a week or so. We really try to take our time with our stories. And that photographer won't, even if they are shooting digital, they'll probably shoot 1,000 pictures or something, but they'll send us a considered edit because they understand what we're looking for. We do love our options, as every photo editor says, can I have more options? But a lot of our photographers also shoot on film. And if we have time and that photographer shoots on 4x5 film or medium format or on an 8x10 camera, our next cover story is shot on an 8x10 camera, we always try, if that's their preferred medium is film, then we always want to set them up for success.
So that's a little bit about how the story leads the photography in some ways, like the photographer, their preferred medium, you're kind of looking for the cues within the story to make the choices that you make. Leo, could you talk about how that works for you on the design side of things, how the story might lead some of the design choices that you make?
Yeah, it's an enviable position to be in terms of design, because when I think about like how much work goes into producing a story, you have writers that go out in the field and they report, and some of them spend over a year reporting a story, and it's very much their baby. It's like something that they've worked very hard on and close to for so long. And then when Jackie or Paloma sort of introduce sort of photographers into the mix and trying to sort of curate and choose a photographer that's appropriate. One thing that Jackie had told me once that was so sort of interesting that I took for granted is that a lot of the subjects that we shoot, we tend to tell a lot of stories that are quite tragic sometimes, and to be able to capture someone's emotion or what they've gone through is a difficult thing to do. It's not like something you can just show up and just shoot someone who has gone through something. I think part of it is that relationship that a photographer has and their ability to sort of connect with a subject matter. And that sort of ability, that goes into the curating, the decision-making of why a certain photographer might be more appropriate. And so there's a lot that is going on in the background in terms of how these things are put together. And so when you have the writer's perspective, and then you have the photographer who is briefed on the story and also reads the draft and is introduced to the actual characters that they're reading about, and they have a connection with them, and then you see the photographs that come from that. You see the emotion that comes from that shoot. And then so I have these two sort of very different things, and it's my job to marry them together so that individually they are great, but when they're brought together, it sort of brings their story to life. And so that's why I find it a huge responsibility as a designer to be able to sort of tell that story well. So many people are sort of banking on this being, something that they worked hard on and they want it to look great. And so there's that pressure there. But the great thing about, I guess, as you were mentioning with digital photography is like oftentimes there's a lot of options and stuff. And I have a lot of trust in my photo team. They do amazing work, and they whittle down like literally thousands of shots to like, a manageable amount so that I don't have to go through it. And they have such a great eye for things. And so that sort of influences and it allows me to do my job a little bit more easily. But also and I hate, sorry, this is a bit long-winded, but like, in some magazines, they're very strict with like the photographs that you can use for a story. Sometimes they'll say, this is the only photograph that was taken. So this is your photograph, please use it and design around it. I'm like, there's gotta be more than just one. You had a whole day to shoot or you had an hour. But sometimes there are people that work that way and but there's enough trust within our department to be like, the rest of the shoot is here, but these are our selects. And I'll dive into the ones that are not selected sometimes. And because I have the ability to sort of know what's important to the editors, they'll write a headline and a deck, which is a 2 to 3 sentence intro to the story. And I know what the favorites of the photo editors are. And so what I try to do is I try to sort of allow the imagery to sort of tell the story for me. And so based on how the editors frame the story and what the photo editors love, I try to bring those together. And so, and then that's fun. That's fun for me because I've got like, how do I tell this story with all these images? Like this person took a photograph outside, inside, on a roof, portrait close, portrait far. And so there's so much possibility. And so my mind is constantly thinking in a cinematic way of like, how do I ease the reader into the story? Do I just show a photograph of the person right away, or do I sort of show them the environment first before I go more intimately and show a portrait of them? And so it's liberating to be able to sort of craft that sort of introduction to the reader. And that's what makes it fun. And I'm just grateful that our editor is open to trying different things and not wanting to be like other magazines.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. So what I'm sort of deriving is the typical order of operations is story first, imagery, photography second, and then design third. And I do a lot of user experience design, and we're not that order. We don't do that order.
Yeah.
We usually do like, needs and research, and then like trying to figure out what the thing is, and then trying to structure the thing, and the writing usually comes later. And it's always kind of this thing of like, oh, are we gonna have a writer or not have a writer, to Karen's point earlier, and then like the designer being, throwing stuff in the wireframes. And I don't know if any of you in this room have had the experience where you like put some FPO copy in the wireframes and like then it's on the website and you're like, how did that even happen? But it's just a very different order of operations, and I think that that's so interesting from my perspective to have the opportunity to work in a different order of operations. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about a story that you collaborated on that might be your favorite? I don't know, maybe you love all your children equally, so maybe there's a couple of them, but do you have any stories that are like, yep, that's the one?
I mean, I think our first cover story that we did, is there a slide of our first cover story?
So the images are just cycling through. So people, it's likely would have seen the whole set by now.
Yeah. Our first cover story that we did, we shot it in Portland, Oregon with a photographer named Holly Andres. And Leo and I don't normally go to shoots. It's really lovely. We just let photographers just go out into the world and make pictures, and we're not heavily art directing anything. But our first cover was actually quite heavily art directed. It was about how VR was going to be taking over the way we all consume cinema eventually. And so it was a very staged shoot, and there was this...
Oh, it's like the person, and they're maybe like on the sidewalk, and it's like a plain wall, and then do they have Oculus
it's a little
on?
girl.
Oh, it's a little girl.
And so
okay.
on the cover, she's in a domestic setting, and she's wearing this kind of generic VR goggles. And then you flip to the inside, and she's in this storybook world, this fantasy land. And so that was an exciting, I mean, it might not necessarily be my favorite shoot that we've ever done in the past few years, but that was an exciting experiment because Leo and I were there on this shoot, and we hadn't yet created the magazine yet, so we sort of knew what we were doing. And so that was, I think that was really fun and scary and exciting all at the same time.
Yeah, that was a fun one. Yeah, we definitely don't
Fun.
There are a lot of
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when you did the air quotes "fun," could you explain what you mean by that a little bit more? Because I'm guessing there was some risk, and yeah.
I mean, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to create something that felt new and surprising and important, and it was just Leo and I for the first couple years before we had Paloma and Supriya and Annie joining the art team. So there were a lot of sleepless nights. You know, it's the fear of the unknown. But then once we made it and got feedback from our editor-in-chief that, yes, it's approved, we don't have to reshoot, because in fashion you reshoot everything all the time. So it was, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, please.
No, I was just going to say that, you know how you were mentioning that your process is so different. It's, even though we work in a magazine, not all magazines operate the same, too. It depends on their content. And so some magazines are, like every photograph is very orchestrated. It's very heavily art directed. It's like the creative director or the photo director has a very specific vision for a particular shot. And so there's a general idea of what you're going to get. And with us, it's we don't know what we're going to get. You know, we give some notes to the photographer to sort of say what are some key moments and what are key things to capture. But really, you don't know what's going to happen. You can't dictate. You can't tell someone who's gone through some tragedy or something to like go sit over there and act like you're emotional. You know, like you can't do that. You know, and so how do you? And so that again, it involves the relationship of making them feel at ease. And so. It's different because as a designer, and I didn't start in magazines, I started in design studios, and where the photography is often just very prescribed. You know, it's like, I want it to look like this. I want someone to walk in frame and just blur, and I don't want to see anyone's face, and it's got to be just the right blur, and I want this picture over here in the top right-hand corner, lower it an inch, and then it's just fine. You know, like, you can't do that. And so that's what makes our magazine real, you know, and I think that's what we embrace, is like, if someone's home is very messy or very clean, that's who they are, and it says a lot about who they are as a person, and it dictates a lot of like why we decide to shoot things the way that we do. We try to stay away from too many like studio shots where you're just sort of a plain background, because don't get me wrong, there's beautiful portraiture that you can get from that. But in terms of us, we're telling stories, and what informs who a person is not only the way they look, but their environment as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. I want to kind of shift gears a little bit, because I noticed that we only have about 10 more minutes, and I feel like I could talk to you guys all night about what you do. But I wanted to shift gears a little bit from California Sunday to Pop-Up Magazine. And maybe you could tell us how your collaboration changes working in a different medium. And for those who don't know, Pop-Up Magazine is a live storytelling event. Do you call it like a seasonal tour? You have a tour going on right now of the next edition of the
winter
magazine.
tour. The winter issue.
Okay.
Next issue.
Yes, the next issue. Okay, winter issue. And I think Oakland is sold out, but there are several other cities that are still available. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could speak to your working relationship through that.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you would say the same thing, Leo, but I think it's similar in that, of course, we're producing something for the stage, so the art direction is a bit different, and our art direction to photographers and filmmakers is different, but we're still constantly collaborating and in art meetings and looking at scripts as opposed to drafts. So I would say it's similar.
Yeah, I mean, it's Pop-Up Magazine, so it's based on the form of a magazine, and so it's somewhat familiar to us, like how we make that. And so I would say the process of commissioning photography or illustration is similar. I would say from the design standpoint, it's a little bit different, because you have a captive audience and you control when people see things, which is different than a magazine where you can just flip around and jump around wherever you want. And so the nuance of just like when an image comes on just at the right time when someone says something, that sort of natural sort of partnership is where I think is an interesting sort of experience from my point of view of having worked in magazines for a while to sort of wrap my head around the user experience in a different way. And then also thinking about like, if it's just one image versus a number of images and what that does in terms of creating emotion or conveying some sort of sense of emotion into the story. So the design approach is a little bit different.
I actually don't know the answer to this, which came first.
Pop-Up.
Pop-Up came first.
Was
Okay.
born in 2009. And like before I moved to San Francisco in 2011, I didn't even know what Pop-Up magazine was, but it was like the hottest ticket in town. They would like...
You couldn't get a ticket. I didn't know what it was. It was very,
Yeah,
under
they
the
would
radar.
sell out in like 15 minutes.
I feel like I waited years to get a ticket.
It's
Like,
crazy.
really.
I only was able to go, we had Beck do a music show for us, and I was only able to go to that because Paloma had the flu, and we were freelancing at Wired together. So sorry you were sick, but thank you.
Thank you for being sick. Yeah.
So this discussion is actually about collaboration, and it really seems like you guys have a harmonious collaboration that's built on, you've been working together for 5 years, is that right? Together, just about?
Since 2014.
Okay, so about 5
What
years.
year is it? 2019?
Yeah, it really seems like your relationship is built on trust, and I wondered if you could share what you think the building blocks of an effective collaboration are.
Well, I mean, for me, trust is the biggest thing. You know, I hate to sort of use what you've already said, but I think it's, and it's not just trust amongst us, but it's trust across the board in the entire organization. I think our founder, Doug McGray, he's done an exceptional job of finding really talented people that do not have egos. And so when you have that, which is a great starting point, you have people that just have a high standard of excellence. And with that in mind, people are allowed to do what they need to do. People are not defensive about things. They're not protective of things. And when you get people like that in a room and you speak with reason, people will come around, you know, like, so there's never yelling, there's disagreement, there's often disagreement, but there's never yelling and conflict because we talk it out, we explain why, and eventually people just sort of come around or they buy into it. And everyone's opinion is totally respected. And I'm not married to certain solutions because I truly believe that there are different ways of looking at things. And essentially sometimes the decisions that we make is really between like two great choices, you know? And so at the end of the day, it's not like we're, you know, it's not gonna result in anything bad, you know?
Is that also maybe because the actual design system, that you have so much flexibility in the design system or grid or I'll leave it at that. But in some ways, the constraints of like, no, this is how the magazine is structured, this is our grid, you know, would not allow you maybe to go along with someone else's creative suggestion because you just don't have the flexibility.
Sure.
Whereas in this case, you're bringing that story, you're kind of putting that wrapper around the story and the imagery, and it then takes on its own form of creative expression. But if that doesn't work, then you can if you would like to,
Yeah,
and you're not
change it.
married to the thing that you
exactly.
did. Try something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think as a general interest magazine that tells stories about very many different things, stories that are tragic but also amusing and humorous and thought-provoking, you need that flexibility that's built in so you can adapt, you know, and that was the fun of designing the magazine, is sort of allowing it to have some flex, you know, and being okay with it. Because, yeah.
Do you have a grid? I mean, you must. And do you have?
yeah.
I mean, it's clear that you have structure, but I'm just maybe in another conversation. I'm so fascinated to like peel the curtain back and
Definitely.
see what that structure is that gives you the structure and the flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, the parameters it's very foundational and just basic, you know, so I almost don't set too many rules for myself. And that allows you the flexibility. And with those basic foundation, those rules, then you're able to still maintain a certain look and a structure to it so that it still feels like Hell Sunday.
Would you like to add anything to the
No,
effective collaboration?
I just feel quite lucky that our art department really, we trust one another. We all have different backgrounds, so we're all bringing something different to the table each and every month. And it does stem from, top down. I have worked at many places that there's that trickle-down stress and there's, a blame culture. And we don't have that where we work. And Doug, our editor-in-chief, is, trusted us from day one. And, when I say things to him, like, let's do an exhibition of our photography issue
Wait, is that
in
still
New York.
happening?
Yes,
Oh,
it
okay.
closes on
Can you
Saturday.
tell people about that?
Yeah, so we did our first ever photography issue, which is
In your bags.
It is in your bags, yes.
Yeah, the home
everywhere.
issue.
Yes, home issue.
So it's all about the theme of home. And it's our first ever photography issue, and it's about stories of home across the American West. And one of the photo essays in the issue, we turned into a gallery exhibition, and there's also an audio component with this issue.
I checked out the audio component, and it was so cool because it's largely photography driven. There are captions to tell the people's stories who are in the images, and then you can go on. I don't know if it's an app, I don't remember.
Yeah,
but you basically read their story in printed form, and then you hear their voices telling the same story, and it was really wonderful.
The captions don't match the audio. There's
they're not
more
one-to-one.
about the person. And so this exhibition, it's 3,000 square foot gallery space in Chelsea, and so there are over 90 photographs in this aperture show. And so we commissioned 19 photographers to do this photo essay that's only 20-something pages in the issue. But I said to Doug, okay, we're going to be commissioning all of this amazing photography. It needs to come off the page. Could we experiment and do a gallery show? And he and Chaz, our CEO, said yes. Even before we had, we're very lucky to have Google Pixel sponsor the show and the issue. But very early on, they trusted us to experiment and, it's a blue sky environment.
Yeah,
which
something we've never done before.
Yeah,
So,
that's amazing. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, you guys. This is a thrill for me, so thank you.
thank you.